believe it's our first full week into the off-season since the Bengals season ended last week, but that's what the off-season's all about. Welcome into another Strictly Stripes off-season podcast edition. Muhammad Ahmad back with you for another week alongside Mike Nislek and Andrew Gillis. And I got to ask you guys, just jumping into it, did it just feel weird sitting on a Sunday, like not covering the Bengals either at home or on their own? Because I just felt like part of me's like, I shouldn't be sitting at home right now. I got to be somewhere. Like, I don't know if it's just you get into a routine and you just kind of get used to it. But did you guys kind of feel that this first weekend of like the off season, or do you guys just kind of adapt unlike me?
I needed a break, so I was cool with it. Yeah. I was cool sitting there watching basketball and relaxing. So it was nice to kind of have a little bit of downtime.
Yeah. What about you, Mike?
You're younger. You guys don't have kids yet, so there's no downtime when you're
a parent. That's right. Yeah, well, I'll definitely enjoy this time being 24 and single while I can. I turned 25 in a month, so I'm still within my prime. I think 24, 25 is that prime age of your 20s, so I'm just taking advantage of it. But speaking of watching basketball, I know one of the exciting things, depending on who you ask, on Sunday was the Pro Bowl. Clearly, it's different from how it's been in the past. It's more of a flag football game now for those who haven't really paid attention to it. But if we're talking Bengals connections, Jamar Chase and Trey Hendrickson both participated. Jamar Chase got the most attention out of the two because he had not one but two tutties, hit a couple gritties for the kids that were there and the fans. I saw that T. Higgins was there. I think he gave one of his balls to T, and Tyler Boyd was there. I think Chidobe Awuzie was there. So Gotta have some love from your homies there, which was pretty cool to see. But I don't know if I've asked you guys this on the podcast at least. I forget how long they've been doing the format they have now with the Pro Bowl, but like, what do you guys think of it? Does it really like make a difference to you? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Like, what do you think of the way the Pro Bowl kind of is now, just with the new setup?
The Pro Bowl's always been weird to me because you talk to guys like back in the day where it was like, oh, yeah, like we wanted to win, like it was another game. I'm talking like, Jack Youngblood era NFL. Like those people were like super, super intense with the Pro Bowl. And then,
you talked to
it just kind of.
You talked to a lot of them? You talked to a lot of them?
Have I talked to a lot of them? Yeah.
You talked to a lot of them. When you talked to them.
No, he had a quote because he broke his leg in the playoffs. And then he had a quote where he played in the playoffs and then he played in the Pro Bowl. And because they thought the Pro Bowl was super important. And like, whereas you like compare it to today where, today's guys are kind of like, sometimes I didn't really want to go. So like, then you try to do new stuff, but like, I don't know. I don't know like what you're supposed to do. Flag football feels like a nice compromise. Because none of the players want to play like an actual game. None of them because if you remember the Pro Bowls, like where they actually like it was like full on like a normal game. By the end, the pass rushers would like take two steps and just kind of like stand there. Like it was really just kind of boring to watch. So like I don't know. I watched a little bit of it. Held my attention for a little bit, but I don't really know what the right answer is or what the right fix is because those skills competitions are not necessarily my thing.
There are not many people.
Yeah.
The ratings were terrible. I think it drew 1.1 million viewers. I guess the Grizzlies-Cavs game at the same time, a regular season, nothing drew more of an audience. I don't think people care. They're just going to keep trying things. This, I guess, is a way for less people to get hurt, but I don't get it. Only one really. I was looking at the roster of quarterbacks. I think Jalen Hurts was probably the only quarterback in the top 10 that really played. When Taylor Huntley gets added to the roster, you can kind of get a sense of how much it matters. I
still can't believe that.
I don't think that this is. This might be the answer for the NFL, just in terms of like because people won't get hurt, but I don't think that the audience is going to be there for it.
Well, yeah, and also didn't Josh Jacobs like call it stupid? Like I don't know if he said it on camera or if he told a reporter, but he was like, "This is stupid." Like I think he swore when he said it. Like I don't think the players are necessarily huge fans of this either.
Yeah, I like what you said, though, about the compromise with the flag football, because I think at this point, like, they know whether you make it flag football or you make it the way it's always been for however long. Like, I don't think adults are really going to care. So I think they look at it as, let's appeal more to like kids and teenagers. Because if you looked on the TV, like during the skills competitions in the game, like there was a lot of kids there, and they're going to be like, oh, I want Jamar Chase's autograph. I want Myles Garrett's autograph or whatever. Speaking of which, I mean, this is crazy, but like as much as you avoid injury in those situations, Myles Garrett didn't. I guess what happened in Vegas didn't stay in Vegas because he suffered a dislocated toe, according to Mary Kay Cabot, our Browns insider. X-rays were negative, and I guess it happened when he was participating against Brian Burns in the Gridiron Gauntlet, which is one of those like skills competitions. So hopefully it's nothing too serious for him. But I guess other than that, everyone stayed in pretty good shape. But yeah, I think at this point, they're just marketing it towards kids. They're going to market it towards just younger adults because I think they realize you're not going to get like guys our age, 20s, 30s, 40s, and above. I don't think anyone's really going to be into it. And I mean, even the players themselves, like I think Josh Jacobs spoke for a lot of players who probably kept their thoughts to themselves. So yeah, it's interesting, but I think they should just keep it the way it is. Let the kids have their fun for a day and get ready for the Super Bowl, which is only 6 days away from this day that we're taping the podcast. But we kind of talked about the present. Let's go back in the past a little bit. Well, I guess past and present for those who haven't seen. Adriel Jeremiah Green, former Bengals wide receiver, has officially hung up his cleats. He took to Instagram on Monday to announce his retirement. And I think his name speaks for itself. There's a reason why. He's a household name in Cincinnati. He's second all-time in Bengals team history in total touchdowns, receiving yards, and receptions. The only guy ahead of him is also a household name, a.k.a. Chad Johnson Ocho Cinco. So congrats to him. 12 years in the league, 2 years with Arizona the last 2 seasons. The first 10, of course, with Cincinnati. And I'm just going to start with this. I feel old because when they drafted A.J. Green, the Bengals did, they drafted him 4th overall in 2011. I was still like 12, 13 years old. So being a kid, I thought, oh, this is the coolest thing ever. So like that's probably the equivalent of like what kids that same age, 12, 13 today would have thought when the Bengals got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. But I think what's also cool about A.J. Green is not just his skills. I mean, his longevity. He played a good bit in the league. He's one of only a few players to catch a touchdown from both Andy Dalton and Joe Burrow. I mean, he's up there obviously with Tyler Boyd and Joe Mixon, who are still part of that era, who are still in Cincinnati right now. But I guess when you kind of think about, I mentioned Chad Johnson in the past, you think about T.J. Houshmanzadeh, you go farther back, you think about Carl Pickens and even Eddie Brown when the Bengals went to the Super Bowl in '88, and then you look today with Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. Where would you kind of rank A.J. Green amongst all those guys, or how do you kind of assess A.J. Green in the shadow of like all those names I mentioned, just from your all's maybe memories and just highlights that you've seen of him?
I think it's 1 and 2 with he and Chad Johnson, and you can kind of pick nits for what you want. I mean, I pulled up some of their stats. Yards per reception, AJ Green 14.5, Chad Johnson 14.4. Like 66 touchdowns for Chad Johnson, 65 for AJ Green. 74 yards a game for AJ Green.
He was that
71
close.
yards a game for Chad Johnson. Like they were really, really, kind of neck and neck. Chad Johnson did play 24 more games than AJ Green did. But again, like you kind of look at those two careers, and I mean they're going to go down as two of the better. I don't think receivers too. Probably the better, more impactful fan favorite players in Cincinnati. I mean AJ Green was he had a really nice career, and to kind of go back to your point about feeling old, I saw a screenshot on Twitter. Here are some of the first 15 picks of that draft. Cam Newton went first, Von Miller second, AJ Green fourth, Patrick Peterson fifth, Julio sixth, Jake Locker, I remember those days. Tyron Smith, Dallas went ninth, Blaine Gabbert, JJ Watt, Robert Quinn, Christian Ponder. Like there were some really kind of crazy names in there that you can, obviously there's some flops, there's some Hall of Fame players in there. But yeah, it's kind of the end of that era. The guys who kind of came up in that time are starting to leave. JJ Watt just retired. AJ Green just retired. It's kind of a crazy world.
Well, I think bigger question, because I think he's clearly number 2 in Bengals history in terms of receivers. It's with an asterisk because if Jamar Chase spends like 3 more years here, he'll surpass almost all those numbers, maybe 4. But in terms of him, he had such a high peak. His first 11, 12, 13, 14, 6 seasons were really incredible, but then sort of fell off a cliff, missed the 2019 season. I think the bigger question is he Hall of Fame worthy? Because he's certainly on that bubble. You could argue that his first 6 seasons were among, like the most impactful, but, really in that back half of his career, fell off significantly. I think he's on that bubble, and I don't know that he gets it. Only 1,000-yard season in that last 7 seasons. 2 of those obviously spent with Arizona. I think there's an argument to be made for him just because of how impactful he was coming out of entering the league, but I just don't know if he had the longevity statistically to match up with some of the better receivers in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's a good point. Here are the 5 before him in terms of all-time receiving yards and the 5 after him. So here are the 5 before: Keyshawn Johnson, Stanley Morgan, Gary Clark, Roddy White, Joey Galloway. Then the 5 after him: Mike Evans, going to pass him next year, assuming Mike Evans plays. Harold Jackson, Travis Kelce, going to pass him next year. Santana Moss, and Lance Allworth. I don't know how many of those guys are Hall of Famers.
Mike Evans might be, I think.
Mike Evans is a Hall of Famer. But
Kelce, of course.
Right. And I think just kind of looking at this list, the numbers don't stack up. I think, you can get into this argument with, like a Matt Stafford, where, the end of his career, it's like he won a Super Bowl. If he plays a few more years, his numbers are going to be 4th in this and 6th in this, and it's going to be high up there with AJ Green, a guy like that who didn't win a Super Bowl, didn't really do. He was a 7-time Pro Bowler, but he wasn't. I don't think he was ever really universally considered like the best at his position.
He wasn't like a Megatron.
He wasn't like a top player in his league. So if you're not that, you need some of the numbers to kind of back up. And I wonder if those numbers kind of hamper him, just because you're going to get passed by some guys in your era. I mentioned like Julio Jones is one of the best receivers ever, and he was in his draft class. So you're just kind of a product of your era because you've got to stand out in some way. And
I don't think
he is on that bubble though.
I don't think he won a playoff game in his career. Obviously, not that
he didn't.
Him, so,
I don't know if that matters.
He didn't.
Like the playoff.
I don't know, Andrew. That's a tough one. I think that's going to hurt him a lot.
Yeah, you don't have a moment to shine, sort of in the postseason. But it's just more data points against him. I don't think that's sort of like the defining thing, but it does stack with you. And I think with receivers, it's going to be harder because the numbers are just going to keep getting better. This is much more of a passing league, so it's harder to stand out as a receiver unless you're something special like a Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson type, Tyreek Hill, where you're just putting out sort of crazy numbers because that's what even your sort of pedestrian wide receivers right now just rack up numbers.
Yeah, and I see both arguments of the playoff situation as to where he didn't really win a playoff game because, the Bengals didn't win a playoff game until basically Joe Burrow came and they made that Super Bowl run. But, there's some good players that are Hall of Fame light or Hall of Famers who I don't even think played in the playoffs, but that number's just so small. And they made up for it by being just like you said, like a Megatron, like a Barry Sanders. Like Barry Sanders, I think, made the postseason only a handful of times. He made an NFC Championship his third year, and since then, the Lions probably made the playoffs once or twice. So, but that's the thing. He was just that good. It didn't matter. He was and still is one of the best of all time. And so, yeah, you talk about the current players closing the gap. You talk about just the poor postseason resume, which I'm not going to say is completely his fault. He actually did pretty good in the playoffs, but just everything else that's another podcast conversation. But it's definitely tough, and it's just crazy because he left right before the Bengals basically went to the Super Bowl. Like, he had just missed on that window. And obviously he's not bitter about it. He even, congratulated the Bengals on his social media when they made the Super Bowl last year. So, but I'm sure deep down he probably wonders, like, dang, that could have been in the Super Bowl, could have been in the playoffs, but, could have, should have, would have. It is what it is. But I don't know. If you want to kind of compare him to the now, like beyond the Hall of Fame debate, which, again, I think right now he's leaning against it. It's a little tough right now because of all the aforementioned things. But I was thinking about this, and you guys might think I'm a freak when I say this, but, like, if you want to kind of compare him to, like, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, I think if somehow, like, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins had a baby, it would be A.J. Green. I see, like, so much in both of them that, like, you could literally combine in the both of them. Yeah, I know people can't see it. You guys have the looks on your face, but look, he was just as fast and explosive as Jamar Chase. He wasn't as tall. He was taller because, Jamar Chase is just over 6 feet and T. Higgins is almost 6'5", but he had the same vertical, the same ability to beat double coverages. His balance, the way he stayed on his feet, even when he was breaking 1 or 2 tackles, reminds me so much of, like, what T. Higgins has shown, in the sample size he's had in 3 seasons. And I mean, there's only more we have to see from, like, Jamar Chase and Higgins, but I'm saying if you give me what, like, I've seen from those two in their 2-3 combined seasons, and you give me what A.J. Green did in his first 9 years in Cincinnati when he played with Andy Dalton, he's kind of like a cross hybrid between the two. And it makes me wonder if you had, like, 2011 A.J. Green with a modern-day Joe Burrow, I always wonder, like, what would that look like? Because we know what it was like with Andy Dalton. They were both drafted in the same class, 1 round apart. But could you guys just imagine, like, a prime A.J. Green with a Joe Burrow that's playing the way he is today? I mean, like, how much different do you think that would be?
Jamar Chase is better, right?
I think in those attributes, I think he's faster. I think he's quicker.
Better than he is, and they're on the team right now.
So what if you had A.J. Green and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but not Tyler Boyd? So, like, Chase is the number 2 or the number 1, A.J. Green's the 1 or 2, and then Higgins is the number 3. What if you kind of fantasize it like that? What do you imagine?
Wait, saying so AJ, Jamar, and T. Higgins?
Yeah, like prime AJ Green.
Well, I mean, what if Aaron Donald was on the 2000 Ravens? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, I think.
Hang on. That's a far-fetched comparison. Like, that team was a Hall of Fame team.
But
like, I don't know
so
if the 21 Bengals were in that league. Yeah.
The year that the year that it was AJ Green and Joe Burrow and T. Higgins, AJ Green 47 catches, 523 yards. Like, he was fine. He wasn't kind of what he was. But then you replace, a player who can put up 1,400 yards in a season with a player who can put up 1,400 yards in a season. So I don't know. I think, I think you like, if you're wondering what AJ Green would have looked like with Joe Burrow, I think maybe functionally it looks different with kind of how it happens, but I think the end result is
that's what I'm saying. Like, how functionally different would it be?
Still, yeah. I don't know. Maybe more deep balls, but like Jamar put up 1,400 yards in his rookie year, 1,455 to be exact, and to like AJ Green never did that, like, in his career. And I understand Joe Burrow is a better quarterback than Andy Dalton was, but you have an elite level receiver. I don't know if you need to do much fantasizing about, what if the Bengals had another elite receiver? They already have one elite receiver and a second very, 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 very good receiver.
Yeah, this is not to take away from, like, what Jamar Chase has done. I'm not saying, swap out Jamar Chase. I'm just saying, like, just put Jamar aside for a second. Like, even put T aside for a second. On the same team but aside, and just think about Joe Burrow throwing a beautiful, lofty vertical to 2011 A.J. Green. Like, not taking away from those guys. I'm just saying, like, that could have been something. And I'm not saying the Bengals didn't hit the jackpot with Andy Dalton. I mean, they really didn't. But, I mean, he could have been way, way worse. I mean, he still took him to the playoffs. although they didn't win a single one of them, which that is one of the most paradoxical eras, I think, in Bengals history. But the point is, they're all good receivers. They're all talented. Like, I think Jamar Chase, like to your point, Mike, I think he is better overall, holistically. I think there's some areas where AJ Green has an advantage, like his vertical, his leap, and his 6'4" frame. But I think even then, like with Jamar Chase's height, like we've seen him make catches in double coverage. We saw the 4th and 6 catch in Kansas City, which even for what that loss is worth, I think was one of the best catches of his career. Like overall, he's better. He is better, but man, that would have been a heck of a duo. I think primetime AJ Green with any elite quarterback would have been fun to watch, but the past is in the past, and now we move forward. And when we come back, we're going to look to the future after looking in the past and present as we talk Senior Bowl, kind of talk about some guys that stood out, where the Bengals can maybe put some stock in some Senior Bowl players. Plus, we continue the coaching carousel as Lou Anarumo gets another big shot, and we talk about that and much, much more right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast. And thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. So we've gone through the past, we've gone through the present, so why not look into the future a little bit? We had the Senior Bowl wrap up this past weekend in Mobile, Alabama. It's where you get kind of you get some day one guys, but a lot of your day two, day three guys, draft-wise speaking at least, who show off their guns and their talents with a chance of raising and elevating their stock. Earlier last week, I wrote about some guys to watch in the game, and granted, you have so many players who only get a few reps each, so really any names that you see in that game, if they play, they only play so much. But I think one name that comes to mind, since I think one of the biggest priorities draft-wise, no matter what happens in free agency, I think is tackle. I think if the Bengals maybe don't hit that first round, they want to get kind of like a day two, maybe late day one tackle. I could see them going with, if you're just looking strictly at Senior Bowl talent, I think Blake Freeland out of BYU looked good. Didn't allow any sacks, only allowed a couple pressures. He's a name I didn't really hear about much until, to be honest, coming into this past weekend. He was one of the top 10 pass blockers according to PFF. He was a third-team All-American. I mean, he played at BYU, which didn't do much this year, so maybe that's where he got overshadowed, but his numbers look pretty good. I saw this is interesting. He won javelin and shot put state titles in Utah in high school. That's, I think, a name to look at if you're not looking for maybe that day one first round prime talent. I also think even though he didn't really play much in the game, Chase Brown, who was on the national team, I think if you look at his tape, if you maybe want to hit him day two, day three, that's a guy that could be on the come up. His brother, Sidney, plays defensive back. He played for Illinois, too. They both played at Illinois, so you never know if the Bengals want to look at corner. Sidney's not a bad guy to look at. And speaking of which, I don't know that the Bengals can land this guy because he's considered like really, really prime potential. But Devin Witherspoon, another Illinois cornerback. I'm not biased, I promise. These are just names that I've really been looking at. If you want to add some depth behind Chidobe Awuzie with his ACL injury and Cam Taylor-Britt and Eli Apple possibly not coming back next year, maybe you try to go for him. I don't know. I'm not Duke Tobin. I'm just throwing out a hypothetical. I think defensively up front, which I think they should look at in the draft for depth, like a defensive tackle, I think Keanu Benton from Wisconsin was good. Dan Lobby, who covers the Browns, actually wrote about him a little bit because I think the Browns could even use a guy like him. You know, they have Zach Carter, who they drafted in the third round last year. He's great, and I think they should stick with him too, but never hurts to have a little more depth next to him. So, I mean, he was, all Big Ten at Wisconsin, 10 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks last year. And then everyone's talking about Michael Mayer at tight end. I think the best player not named Michael Mayer who's a tight end in the draft is Luke Musgrave. He showed that in the game playing for the American team. And again, whether they don't keep Hayden Hurst and or Drew Sample or even Mitchell Wilcox, although I think Wilcox obviously stays. If you don't keep either of the other two, and you can't really land someone like a Michael Mayer, as awesome as that would be for the Cincinnati area. I think Musgrave is definitely slept on, mostly because he was hurt in his senior year. But when he wasn't hurt, he looked really good. If he wasn't hurt, you could even put him like neck and neck with Mayer. But enough of me rambling. What do you guys think of those names? Are there other names that stick out? What do you make of this weekend's past Pro Bowl? Not Pro Bowl. We're talking about the Pro Bowl, the Senior Bowl.
First, the Senior Bowl, the game itself is kind of irrelevant. It's the week of practices. I've covered it twice. The game sort of all the scouts leave basically
you did?
by the end of the week.
That's awesome.
So it's the practices that matter. That they watch the practices, and that's where they get the sense of who's having an impactful week. So that the game is sort of secondary to all of that. In terms of, I think tight end, you mentioned Luke Musgrave. During the week, he was clocked at going over 20 miles per hour. He's 6'5", 255 pounds. One of only 9 players that accomplished that. And the only tight end that's done that when they've measured that over the last 5 years. I mean, could you imagine a guy like that with that speed lined up with Chase and Higgins? They're saying, his measurables might get him in the top 50 picks. So that would leave the Bengals. It would be hard to get him, but if you want to have an impact player at that position, he's certainly a guy out of Oregon State. I think he'd be their first round pick ever. In terms of having impact, but he obviously, with tight end being in position to watch, I don't think Hayden Hurst would be a bad option to keep re-sign at a favorable deal if you wanted to kind of focus elsewhere. But he was a guy that I just based on some of those things, the size wise and then the skills really jumped out.
Yeah, I've seen. I believe the pronunciation is Cody Malk or Malk. I don't know whatever the kid's name
Cody
is.
Malk, I think is his
from
name.
North Dakota State. If you're gonna go tackle, they obviously liked what Cordell Volson gave him. If you're gonna draft a kid who you kind of need to be ready. You don't want to necessarily draft a project because who knows what's going to happen with La'el Collins. Is he going to be ready for the start of training camp, for the start of the season, for the start of preseason? You might have to bring in a guy who is like that. So, I've seen a lot of him, heard a lot about Tajay Spears again, but like Mike said, by the way, the Spears is the running back from Tulane. But again, like the thing that, like Mike said, you have a whole season of tape to kind of look at. You've got 12 games of sample size from a kid's year, maybe 13 or 14. You got previous years. You can kind of evaluate. I don't know if you're necessarily learning a ton about these guys on the field in a week. So I've always kind of laughed at Senior Bowl risers and fallers. I think sometimes you can talk to people and the conversations that you have maybe force a guy to go off a board or down a board or whatever, because NFL coaches get to see what these guys are like in person. You get to kind of have conversations with them and see how kind of their practice habits and things like that. So obviously that's that's obviously kind of something that I've always kind of poked fun at. But to me, I think one of the unique things about kind of this offseason, I'm glad Mike mentioned tight end. I wonder if this offense, instead of, if you're not going to look at a tackle, if you don't try and add a tight end that can block, because you can talk about the Bengals tight ends and Hayden Hurst is, he really gave you a lot, and you're going to get, Sample back, and you're going to get, maybe bring Mitchell Wilcox back. Like there's guys you could bring, but none of them are like plus level blockers. Everybody talked about Hayden Hurst, improving as a blocker, but I don't think blocking is what he's ever really going to be known for. So I wonder if you don't kind of try to run more 12 personnel, things like that. So tight end, I think, is kind of an interesting way around not drafting a tackle, at least in the early rounds. Like if you're not going to draft a tackle, second round, third round, I think adding a tight end would kind of give you a little bit of help. Makes it a little bit easier on those guys if you have a guy who's a pretty good blocker that can chip defensive ends like TJ Watt and stuff like that. So,
a tight end that got interesting reviews during the week with fits sort of that skill set and is probably a better pass catcher than Mitchell Wilcox is Payne Durham out of Purdue, 6'5", 258. One of the stats that jumped out, I was reading about him, was that the quarterback rating when he's targeted is 116.8. But he's a very good inline blocker and really impressed some scouts this week during practice. So he kind of fits that mold and probably somebody you don't have to obviously take in the first round. It'll depend kind of what they want to do. At one point I missed, but Oregon State's had first-round draft picks. He'd be the first one since 2014 and only second one in the last 20 years, Musgrave. So it's still rare, not as rare as I mentioned, but misspoke there. But what do you guys think in terms of defensively? I was looking at the contracts and, Trey Hendrickson's contract now, the dead cap number is really low the next 2 years. And his cap hit is really high if they keep him. Trying to get a pass rusher this year to sort of develop him to, eventually kind of line up their replacements. One guy in the Senior Bowl this week that kind of drew attention was Will McDonald from Iowa State. Had kind of a crazy resume out of there. One of the 34 sacks, Big 12 career record. 34% of his tackles were for a loss. Size-wise is very different. He's kind of like I heard described as like a small forward, kind of lean. But developing a guy that could kind of take your place of Trey Hendrickson, who would seem like a likely cap hit, next year, maybe not this year, but and they need more pass rush. I feel like.
Yeah, I kind of like that just generally because I mentioned that offensive tackle. Like if you're going to pick one, depending on what La'el Collins' health is, and Jonah Williams was kind of banged up this year, you might need a guy to play immediately. Defensive end, you don't really need to do that. So I kind of like that just from I guess 30,000 foot view, because you've got Hubbard and Hendrickson, and then you've got Osai and Sample behind them. You feel good about kind of where you're at defensive end. So if you want to draft a guy who maybe is a little bit raw, you could kind of develop. I think that would be a really, really nice approach to this because, good teams, they draft best player available, but they also kind of look at where their team is at and what you need. I mean, the Bengals right now, they don't, you don't really need a defensive end to come in and start. It's okay if you have to take a project. And I think that's kind of a nice little way around kind of adding defensive ends and kind of stockpiling yourself for the future.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a good point, Mike. I'm actually glad you brought that up because, Hendrickson's contract is through the 2024-2025 season. So got 2 years left, but he is expensive. He's shown why he is. I mean, he's a Pro Bowler for a reason, and he set the franchise record for sacks in a single season. So he's been worth the money, but, I mean, when you're in the Joe Burrow contract extension era, like, you got to think in the long term. So, yeah, I think you can definitely plan for that and kind of, like Andrew said, get a project out of it, develop someone like that next to someone like Joseph Osai. You still got Sam Hubbard for a good bit because he signed an extension last year. So Sam Hubbard's locked down for the next couple of years, and he's playing some of the best football he's played in his career, even withstanding injuries. I think this Freeland kid I mentioned out of BYU, he's not really much of a project. I mean, I know Pro Football Network, the assessment they had is he kind of brings a nice mix of raw speed, power, and athleticism. He reminds me a lot of Cordell Vosen, like you said, because Cordell's about 6'7", 6'8". Freeland's just a quarter inch under 6'8", 320 pounds. So, if his stock only gets higher and higher, and they like his tape, like I mentioned, the Pro Football Focus grades and whatever else they see. I'm assuming BYU will have a pro day, and he has a good pro day. He has other showings. Maybe he gets invited to the combine. I think you can definitely make a case for him there if you want to build around tackle, and then say whatever happens to La'el Collins, Jonah Williams. You got guys you can put in there. And then with running back, we'll just kind of have to see what happens with Joe Mixon. But even then, I think you still want to have depth behind him because, I mean, Mixon's not going to be around forever either. He's got 2 years left on his extension that he signed 2 years ago. So always good to plan for the future. To wrap up with the future, for those who missed it, Lou Anarumo is one of 3 known finalists for the Arizona Cardinals head coaching job. He will be getting a second interview this week. I know Mike Kafka was one of the other of the 3 finalists for that job. So it looks like things are getting pretty serious here for Lou, Sweet Lou as I like to call him. So I haven't seen the updated odds on the Arizona Cardinals head coaching job candidates or the Colts, because I know Brian Callahan just had a second interview, but kind of 2 parts here. What would the Cardinals be getting if they decide to hire Anarumo, and if Anarumo decides to go there? And how we've talked about how he'd be a bigger hit leaving than Callahan, but why or what rather would the Bengals be losing out of a guy like that if he somehow leaves and takes that job, if he gets it?
Andrew.
Yeah, I think
Andrew.
yeah. Well, yeah, it's always funny. I never know. Like, I don't want to jump in and when Mike has something to say or vice versa. But
Sure.
when you get Flores and Kafka and Aruma there, I think it's an interesting mix. You've obviously got a guy with head coaching experience there. If the Cardinals do move on him, on Anarumo, that is, you're going to get a guy who you feel pretty good about what he can do with your defense. I'm curious. I would be curious to see what that offense looks like because obviously Lou's background is in defense. You've got DeAndre Hopkins, Hollywood Brown. I really like that tight end. They have Trey McBride. You got Zach Ertz. Obviously, Kyler's coming off a knee. Like, you've got some interesting choices there offensively. So I think that if you get the right coordinator in there offensively, you could really do some good things because defensively, I mean, you kind of look at their depth chart. I like Isaiah Simmons. I still think, you can do a lot of really, really, really cool stuff with him. But, JJ Watt's retiring. There's not a ton of guys on that list that you look at and go, this is a solid player. This is a solid starter. This is a plus starter, whatever you want to say. Like, I think that you really kind of need Lou's expertise there defensively. So I think that that's kind of what makes him attractive. But again, Brian Flores has done this. Like, Brian Flores coached in Miami when they were quite literally trying to lose, and he turned that team around. They won like 5 games. I think they won like 5-11. That first week of the year, I think they lost to the Ravens like 59-10 or something like that. Like, the guys didn't want to be there, and they ended the season by beating the Patriots in New England. Brian Flores can coach a team that isn't necessarily supposed to be very good. So, I think that, you've got those would be kind of my two favorites, Anarumo and Flores, just kind of looking at the outlook of the team. But you need a guy who's going to be able to handle Kyler because he's your franchise quarterback. And frankly, he's your franchise.
Well, yeah, I think that's sort of the crazy part of it. Like, if you're Lou, like, it's going to be really difficult spot unless you have like a really good offensive coordinator in mind that you think could sort of unlock Kyler's potential. Because I mean, he's locked up now through 2028. His salary, and cap hit is insane. So it's they go as he goes, and obviously you had an offensive minded coach that he sunk essentially because they couldn't get along and he couldn't get him to focus and sort of dive in. And so are you really gonna? You can't move on from him. So you have to decide that he's a franchise quarterback. Yeah. And comparing him and Joe Burrow in terms of like their emphasis, all Joe does is eat, sleep, and breathe football. Do you want a guy that doesn't have that? And you saw what it takes to win, but these jobs are very rare. But to go with a defensive-minded coach, I think would be very strange for Arizona. And I think his tenure would be successful or not based on his offensive coordinator hire. I think you'd need to hit a home run with that right at the bat, or you're going to be, I think, in trouble. I think it's a tough landing spot for a defensive-minded coach just because of all that.
Yeah, and I agreed on that because you look at kind of where the roster is right now. 2023. Kyler Murray has a $16 million cap hit. He's under contract through 2028. So from 24, 25, 26, 27, and 28, here are his cap numbers. 51 million, and there's a little bit of change here, but 51 million, 45 million, 55 million, 43 million, 46 million. This team is invested in Kyler Murray. This team is ready to, and you can't really get out of that for the first 2 years. So like, you're going to have $33 million in dead money if you get out of him in 2025. So like, that's not a place you want to be. So again, it matters, like Mike said, because even if you hire, you could make the greatest offensive coordinator hire in the world, but what's to stop that coordinator is not going to leave after 2023? Like, you've got to believe in your heart of hearts that Kyler's the guy, and you've got to have a plan for him if you're going to take that job.
Yeah, it's tough. It's very tough because you laid out the picture. And I mean, just in general, no offense to the Cardinals, but in their team history, they haven't had a head coach last more than 6 seasons, ever. This even goes back to when they were in St. Louis and Chicago. Even Wisenhunt and Bruce Arians, those guys didn't last that long, and they had some pretty successful tenures. Like Whisenhunt took them to a Super Bowl. Arians almost did with Carson Palmer. So that just tells you a lot. Again, no offense to them, but like it's just not. They're kind of like what the Bengals were up until Joe Burrow kind of changed the face of that team. Like they just didn't really do much, and I don't personally have that much faith in Kyler, which is why I would definitely be worrisome about whether it's Mike Kafka or Brian Flores or Lou Anarumo. Like, can you really make it work even with a home run coordinator? Defensively, I think Anarumo could bring that up in not a heartbeat. I mean, it took him 2-3 years to build the Bengals defense up to a Super Bowl defense. But like, I mean, even if you give him time to build that up, it all comes down to like, what can you do with Kyler? What can you do with DeAndre Hopkins? AJ Green just retired, so now you need another wide receiver. That's probably going to be one of their draft priorities, especially now that he's done. So honestly, if I'm Lou Anarumo, like hearing what you guys said and just my own perception of the organization and Kyler Murray, I don't think that's a job you take. I think it's a great experience for him that he's getting that recognition, that he's a top 3 finalist, and that's good for him. He's very, very well deserving of it. I've been saying this for like months now, but I don't think Arizona's it. Brian Callahan has already been eliminated from consideration for that job, so we'll see what happens in Indy with that coaching search. I think, not jumping to conclusions here, but to kind of wrap with this, I mean, if somehow things get serious with Indy and Brian Callahan, I don't think that'd be a bad spot. I think if he's confident they can draft a good quarterback and they can work with what they've got and maybe make some moves in free agency, I don't know. I don't think, again, just like with Zach Taylor, it wasn't an overnight thing. It took Zach Taylor 2 losing seasons and the top overall draft pick to get where they are, but like give the Colts maybe 2-3 years, assuming Callahan's under the wheel. Like, I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't be the worst spot in the world, but yeah, Arizona, I mean, good luck to whoever takes that job. I genuinely wish them my best because, man, I just feel pain thinking about that. That hurts. But we're going to end on a good note, which is that this week we're going to kind of wrap up the regular season looking at different positional groups from quarterback to wide receiver all the way up to the defensive secondary, how they did, how they'll fare next year, and why that is, plus much, much more on free agency and our predictions for what's going to happen in over a month. But once again, for myself, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Nizick, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. We'll see you tomorrow, and make sure you sign up for Cincinnati Football Insiders. Go to cleveland.com/Bengals.